Good afternoon, everybody. For those that don't know, I'm Stephen Kelly. I'm Chief Executive of Manufacturing Northern Ireland. I'm delighted that you've joined us today for this webinar, which is on energy, emissions, and export, and what every manufacturer needs to know. This session aims to help manufacturers understand how energy use, emissions, and export competitiveness are now linked, and what you can do to stay ahead of the requirements as they change. Europe is a very critical market to many of Northern Ireland's manufacturers. In fact, our trade to the rest of the island has more than doubled since Brexit. And now with the EU's Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, or CBAM as it's known as, coming into effect from January the 1st of 2026, now is an important moment for businesses to understand what changes, if any, are needed and how to respond to that. In the session, we'll hear from Ben Craig from our partners CarbonFit, who will explain what's changing, how it links to energy use and emissions in your factory, and what information your customers are likely to ask you for. By the end of the session, you should be hopefully a bit clear on whether you're in scope, what good data actually looks like, and the steps to take in the remainder of 2025 and into 2026 to avoid any surprises, delays, or unnecessary costs when selling into Europe. Very pleased, as I said, to be joined by Ben Craig, who's the Strategic Partnership and Business Development Lead at CarbonFit. And that's an organization that helps your organization navigate their energy and carbon challenges. With a background in sustainability strategy and business transformation, Ben has worked closely with manufacturers across Northern Ireland to identify opportunities for energy efficiency, compliance with emerging regulations, and long-term business resilience. Ben brings a collaborative, practical, and results-driven approach to decarbonisation, ensuring that clients not only meet their regulatory requirements, but also build that competitive advantage. A little bit of housekeeping for you. We will be sharing the slides and the recording of the seminar after the event in our usual channels. There is an opportunity after Ben presents to ask Ben some questions. If you could use the Q&A function or the chat function, I'll get to those questions at the end. We do want this to be as interactive as possible, so if you have those questions, do take the opportunity to ask them. On that note, Ben, thank you very much for joining us today and for your continued support for manufacturing in Northern Ireland. I'll hand over to yourself and we'll come back to you towards the end, but we'll leave the thorny issue of CBAM to you for now and hopefully bring some clarity for those on the call.
Thanks very much, Stephen, and delighted to be on the call. It's great to be here and talking to everybody about this issue. It is obviously quite pressing, given it's less than a month away till EU CBAM actually kicks in terms of financial tariffs, but we'll get into that. Listen, good afternoon, everybody. As Stephen said, my name is Ben Craig. I work for CarbonFit. I'm sure we've come across many of you on the call, and likewise, as Stephen said, we're a carbon and energy intelligence platform. We work closely with manufacturing companies across Northern Ireland and beyond. Listen, my goal today is to try and cut through the noise here around energy, carbon reporting, export, and give you some information that's, hopefully going to set you at ease or put the fear of God into you. Hopefully not, but if it does do that, with some very practical actions that you can take. And even if you are quite prepared, hopefully you come away with a greater level of reassurance and even some tips on how you can generate a bit more competitive advantage along the way. So let's get right into it. So the agenda, I'm going to have a quick focus on what are some of the pressures reshaping the manufacturing industry here. We're going to look at CBAM as, well, it's a challenge, but it's also an opportunity. And you heard me mention before about competitive advantage, and that's the lens through which I'm going to explore it. Energy, emissions, and export advantage. This is how these three things are going to come together within the CBAM context and broader sustainability reporting. We're going to cover a quick success story case study of a business we've been working with, going to give you a bit of an overview of what's coming next in terms of regulation, and then a bit of a roadmap of what can you actually do now, what do you need to be aware of over this next little period of time. So, as Stephen said, at the end we'll jump into Q&A to try and pull out anything that we've missed or anything that's presented, something you'd like some further clarity on. Okay, so for everybody, quick just refresher here. When we're talking about emissions and your carbon footprint, we're talking about Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3. Important to recognize these differences when we begin to think about CBAM. In terms of CBAM, Scope 1 and Scope 2 is going to be very applicable for EU CBAM for you for 2026. Scope 3 is going to be much more applicable to you for UK CBAM come 2027. Scope 1, of course, is anything that you burn on site and then comes from an asset. Your Scope 2 is your electricity that you consume. And Scope 3 is everything upstream and downstream of you. And particularly, this is your supply chain in the context of CBAM. So, as I said, that's going to be more important for UK CBAM 2027. All right, so some of these pressures reshaping Northern Ireland manufacturing. The first is cost. Energy waste is not a profit issue, and we routinely find, kind of 10 to 25% of avoidable consumption in Northern Ireland manufacturing companies. Even though we've got a well-embedded lean manufacturing system in place, I think it's always worth having another review of that, and we'll come back to that at the end of the session as well, of some things that we can support on that with. Compliance pressure, number 2, CBAM's the big one that's very pressing right now, but also ESOS for those larger organizations amongst the cohort, and SECR. Or for those of you who are really large, TCFD or ISSB as it now is, requirements and future all-Ireland regional rules may be affecting more businesses year on year. The last piece, of course, is customer pressure. Whether they're GB buyers or EU customers, and they're asking you to prove your carbon intensity. You may have come across people that are losing work because they can't supply basic emissions information. That's the new competitive reality. The question for you is really, if you're not at the position to be able to provide that, you may come a cropper on that one. Okay, CBAM. As Stephen mentioned, this is the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism. Important to note that there are 2 of these. There's the UK CBAM and the EU CBAM. The EU CBAM is the crocodile closest to the boat at this stage, because we've been in a transitional phase with it, 2023 to 2025, which has just required some reporting on that for people who are in scope. And for those who are not sure, well, why do we even need this? What's the whole point of it? It's really to stop and mitigate carbon leakage. So essentially, if somebody wants to move their production facilities to another country that has less stringent carbon regulations in place, and they then want to import those back into a regulated carbon market, they're going to face a tariff. And that's what that CBAM tariff is. And it's to level the playing field on those carbon intensive products. In terms of CBAM, it places a carbon cost on imported goods. So exporters must report CO2 per product, CO2 from energy, and any carbon pricing already paid. Sectors relevant for the EU CBAM are steel and fabrication, aluminium, cement-based products, fertilizers, chemicals, hydrogen, electricity, or components feeding into those sectors. UK CBAM omits electricity from that list. The timeline here, as we just kind of said there, 2023 to 2025 has been that transitional phase, but come 1st of January 2026, the EU is going to begin phasing in financial charges on CBAM, and they're going to ramp that costing up all the way through to 2034. There are some free allocations still in place, but those are going to phase out between now and 2034. In 2027, UK CBAM kicks in 1st of January. So we'll have a look at, what does that mean in both scenarios as we go along here. So how do you know if you are in scope for CBAM? So if your products fall under CBAM CN codes, which is the CN code is how CBAM products are being identified. So if you're exporting, you're going to need to align what you're reporting to your CN code. And CBAM, a good way to think of it, to be honest, is the 50-ton rule that's in place for EU importers is a filter on your EU buyer, not you as the exporter. So this is a big difference between the EU CBAM and the UK CBAM. For 2026, the big challenge here is identifying whether your EU buyer is in scope or not. And if they are the importer, they are really going to want to know your data. Okay, and they're going to be in scope if they bring in more annual imports of 50 tons, essentially, on these regulated products. Okay, you're not in scope. Okay, and this is where the relaxation has occurred in EU CBAM, which is great. If you're exporting to a small scale importer in the EU, and so this is why the relaxation has kind of been applied to allow SMEs a bit more ease in terms of what they need to provide and comply with regulation. From 2027, UK CBAM will come into effect, and it will apply to companies here. So if you're importing slightly different instead of tonnage, they're going to be looking at cost. So if you're importing £50,000 or more of CBAM goods, that cost is going to be something that you're going to face in terms of a UK CBAM tariff. So we'll get into how you can reduce that as we go along here. So you're in scope for EU if your importer is importing more than 50 tons of a regulated product. You're not in scope if it's less than 50 tons on EU. And come 2027 for UK stuff, it's going to be around that £50,000 plus import level. Okay, so just to kind of make it real for people a little bit here, just done a bit of indicative tariff costing 2026 for EU. So the EU emissions trading scheme price at the moment is somewhere between 70 and 80 euros per ton of CO2. So if we look at some of the tariffs here, if you provide verified emissions, you can drop down from what the what the baseline tariff is going to have to be. Okay, so they default to the highest tariff possible. If you provide no emissions data, the EU default value is going to apply, and that is significantly higher than perhaps what you actually are emitting in terms of your intensity. If you don't have the verified data, you can't prove that, so you're going to your importer is going to face that higher tariff band. So, for example, here, steel is going to drop from, say, for example, 180 euros a ton down to 60, 90 euros a ton, which is significant. Okay, so 30 to 70% price reduction on that tariff available to those importers if they're working with a supplier that can provide verified data. And this is where that competitive advantage really starts to come in. Okay, so how are you going to prepare? What do you need to know? So the first thing, of course, is confirming your CN codes and annual volumes going into whoever it is that you sell to. So really, really important that you check out the CN codes. Basically, that's your 8-digit code. It's the official product classification used in customs declarations, tariffs, and trade statistics. Never get that word right. They are extremely important because, of course, that's how CBAM is worked out on which products are in scope or not. So that will let you, initially work out which of your product lines you're going to need data for. Okay, you're going to collect embedded emissions from all of your suppliers throughout 2026 so that you're ready in order to report on UK CBAM come 2027. You're going to want to ask suppliers to register on CBAM operators portal, which is going to enable direct verified data. So you want to engage with them first, get that data moving, and then want to get them onto the verification portal once you're satisfied that they are up to scratch. You may need to apply to become an authorized CBAM declarant. That's going to be mandatory UK for 2027 January. And you're going to want to align with your customs agent. I mean, this is absolutely crucial. You know, that relationship with your customs agent is going to be crucial to ensuring that you prevent port delays. If all of your paperwork is in place, all your I's are dotted, T's are crossed, things are going to flow very quickly. If they're not, and there's a question over the data and there's a question over the tariff, then things are going to get stuck in port. So it's really important that you perhaps run some test submissions by late 2026 to ensure smooth clearance in 2027. So what happens if a shipment arrives with no CBAM preparation? Well, firstly, customs are going to block the goods. There's going to be no free circulation. So that's going to incur things like demurrage, port charges. They're going to accumulate. Importers might not be authorized. That's going to immediate hold at port. They may be forced to hire an indirect customs rep. Again, further delay, further cost. A good way to think about this is really no emissions data equals default values, highest tariffs. And non-compliance triggers penalties and audit flags. So worst case scenario, the goods are rejected or sent back. You know, this is not something that any customer wants or any supplier wants. So no matter which side of the coin that you're on, whether you're going to be that importer or whether you're going to be that exporter, this is something that you want to get right. So 2026, absolutely critical. So what you are going to need is verified carbon data. Initially, just your verified carbon data, which is going to include your verified energy data and process level emissions. And as you progress towards looking at imports in UK CBAM for 2027, you're going to need your supplier data too. And you're going to move this to auditable reporting. And this is really important to note because spreadsheets are a nice quick way to get moving and get started, but they are not going to be an auditable route for you moving forwards. So, and they're not going to be very manageable as the complexity grows for you within all of this. So you are going to need to move to some form of system around this to enable you to facilitate the right level of reporting and auditability as and when it's necessary. Okay, so 3 reasons why this matters right now and where you can generate some advantage as part of this. There's quite a lot of energy price volatility in Northern Ireland, so the opportunity to be able to negotiate a really good contract is critical. If you're able to focus in on that and get a good rate on your energy, you're going to be an advantage, particularly if it's green energy. There's going to be supply chain demands from GB and EU surrounding all of this. And you've got these new reporting pressures to get across the line. If you're organized around all of this, you are going to absolutely fly with this and you're going to be a lot further ahead than many organizations. So this is a serious source of competitive advantage moving forwards. In summary with that, energy equals emissions equals export readiness. Okay, so all these things really come together as part of this. Every kilowatt hour, every supplier you use contributes to your carbon footprint and your CBAM exposure if you're in scope. And it's going to really affect your tender competitiveness moving forwards. So the good news is, if you get this right, you get lower energy bills, you get preferred supplier status, you get higher scoring in tenders, you get easier, faster, lower tariff exports or imports, and you get a marketing advantage. So there is significant opportunity for manufacturers who really grasp this to move forward. So it's no longer just reporting. This is a differentiator starting to move forwards. What does good look like? Firstly, really automating your processes and getting to grips with your data so that you can move to turning that data into value for yourself. So best-in-class manufacturers in Northern Ireland now have sub-metering on compressors, chillers, main processes. They have very clear baselines. They're controlled out of hours load. They've got verified savings. They've got monthly energy and carbon reporting on demand. They're export ready in terms of the carbon intensity metrics. So they've worked all that out and they've lined it up with their CN codes. And as such, they have a really clear CBAM strategy. This is totally achievable. It can be quick. It can be slow. It really depends on how robust you want to be and the level of CBAM exposure that you have. So we can talk about that in a bit more detail as we go along. So why real-time data matters? Well, this allows you to move to live load profiles. It's a game changer, to be honest. Instead of backward looking, you are in the moment able to manage things. Smart meters give some partial visibility, and spreadsheets aren't auditable. So live load profiles really give you that opportunity to get that equipment level insight, verified savings, give you that monthly carbon energy dashboard, and it also lets you get a building health score. So this is critical. You know, if you're working on a KPI of a building health score, this is critical to ensuring that you are in an optimized state moving forwards, and those that are going to see the best returns. Okay, quick success story for you here. So McCluskey, many of you'll know McCluskey International. We've been working with them for a long time, and you can see some of the results of that on this slide. They really grasped the nettle some years ago now. So, you know, back in 2022, they installed 600 kilowatts of solar PV across 2 sites. That achieved 37% reduction in grid electricity supply. That all sounds grand. And what's the point? Well, the point is £150,000 in savings and a 66% reduction in emissions. That means they can now report on that as part of CBAM. They have that audit trail. They're able to show that, and they've been able to prepare to be audit ready on that with verified reductions in the emissions from their operations. So absolutely critical. They've had their baseline measured. They started reducing things. They've tracked that over time so that they can quantify that. It's auditable. It's not just sitting somewhere in a spreadsheet or sitting in a report somewhere. This is absolutely critical to how they are leveraging that to be prepared for CBAM. So what's coming next in terms of Northern Ireland UK policy? ESOS, you know, the time to report on your action plan is upon us right now as we move forwards. SECR is starting to tighten on medium-sized firms. CBAM, as I've mentioned, 26 and 27, critical years, whether it's EU or UK. And there's this major push which links into all of this for efficiency, electrification. And the good news is there's also quite a bit of funding coming available on this. And the budget did mention advanced manufacturing was going to be a critical area moving forwards. Okay, so, you know, together these shifts mean manufacturers who act early will protect margins, secure contracts, and remain competitive in both the UK and the EU markets moving forwards. So what to do? What's your roadmap? Well, I think if you haven't done already, absolutely critical for you to, step one, get your baseline. You can't reduce what you haven't measured. So understanding your full energy cost and carbon position is the foundation for everything else. Step two is reviewing waste on that. You know, where are you wasting energy in terms of out of hours consumption, capacity overspend on tariffs? There are avoidable usages within what you're doing in your energy, and those can lead to 10 to 25% savings. Those are the fastest wins, and that's, you know, quickly identifiable and able to get you fast returns on things. Step three, optimizing your equipment. So preventative maintenance, absolutely critical. But if you've got HVAC, motors, compressors, controls that are running harder or longer than needed, you got to fine tune these systems, and those can deliver immediate savings. Step 4 is obviously building your carbon reporting pack. If you haven't done one, you don't have one, you're going to need one. Buyers, banks, and supply chains are now requesting that verified carbon data as standard. And step 5 is preparing for UK CBAM. You're going to want to engage your suppliers early in 2026 to gather the data that you need to verify by the end of 2026. This is a bit of a process. It's not something that you can just kind of do within a week. It takes time to engage. It takes time to, in order to profile your supply chain and really see, where's the risk for you within all of this and where's the opportunity in order to generate some competitive advantage. And the final step, 6 here, is to be able to communicate your improvements with some confidence, to avoid greenwashing, to be able to say, yes, we're claiming we've done this and we've got the evidence to back it up. So you want to be able to share that progress with customers and staff, strengthen that trust, support those tenders that you're future ready. I mean, if you're in a position to be able to engage your EU customers that are in scope for CBAM and to say, listen, we're ready for CBAM 1st of January 2026. Here is all of our carbon data. Here, we're verified, we're auditable, and these are the reductions that are associated with that. And you've had that conversation. That's a very welcome conversation. That is going to build that relationship. It's going to build trust rather than trying to work that backwards after things get stuck in port, and your importer customer has a challenge. So if you follow these 6 steps, you are definitely going to be ahead of the policy curve for UK 2027, and you're going to be right on the button for EU CBAM in the early part of the new year. Okay, so I appreciate there are lots of competing pressures here. I've covered a lot of ground there, a lot of policy, so be keen to get into the Q&A. But before I do so, I just want to offer anybody that is keen on some optimization of their energy. If you would like a free energy bill health check, we will give you an estimate on what your carbon savings would be, what your cost savings would be, what your potential hidden savings in your bill would be, and some priority recommendations for that. And we'll do that free of charge for any manufacturing company that's part of Manufacturing NI. Okay, thanks very much. I'll hand over to Stephen. I'll probably stop sharing screen now.
I know you can keep the screen shared, Ben, and just keep that QR code on just as we go through this. Yeah. Apart from anything else, it means in my head smaller on the screen for everybody, which is probably a good idea. So, Ben, that was very informative to say the least, particularly in the context of where Northern Ireland peculiarly sits in all of this. So, sure. Obviously, Brexit has happened. The UK and the EU have agreed to terms of their separation. It's meant that Northern Ireland has a unique market position in terms of goods being able to continue its free circulation in the EU's market, and at the same time maintain its market access freely to the UK market. The cost of that is that Northern Ireland is required to continue to adhere to a set of EU rules around goods, so around goods that can circulate in its market. Over the last number of years, we've been approached a number of times by members here in Northern Ireland who have asked, because they've been asked by their Irish customer or their French customer or their German customer for data in and around their customers' requirement to report on CBAM. We have asked the European Union. They say, go talk to your sovereign government. We ask our sovereign government in the UK, and they say, oh, this is an EU policy, go talk to the EU. And for the last number of years, businesses in Northern Ireland, myself particularly, have been given the runaround, going around in circles, saying, talk to the other side. The other side say, talk, it's nothing to do with us, talk to that side. This is not helped by a misalignment of these policies, certainly in terms of timing, at least in terms of timing, from the EU scheme going effectively live from the 1st of January coming, and the UK has been at least 1 year of a difference. In the middle of all of that, there is confusion for traders here and for their customers. I'll post in the chat in a second the advice that we have been given just in the last number of days and inside the last week from HMRC in relation to the EU CBAM and where Northern Ireland will sit post this. But in summary, what they've said is that Northern Ireland companies do not have a responsibility to report into the EU system, but that does not mean that their customers in Ireland won't have a requirement for reporting, which means that we probably still need to start to capture this data, even in the interest of maintaining good commercial relationships with customers that we currently have. Equally, we will be subject to the UK CBAM once it eventually arrives. So as a minimum, I think it's very wise advice from yourself, which is if you've done nothing until now, that's probably not a good idea. The good idea is to do something. And as a minimum, in terms of using the next 12 months as a means to prepare for the UK's CBAM requirements, then that's probably a very wise time that people can use talking to yourself or whoever other supplier that they use. Before kick-off, there's a question in the chat here, and I'll post the advice that we've been given by HMRC at the same time. There's a question from Jim around, are there moves to align the UK and the EU CBAM? I'll kick that off by answering that the UK has asked for negotiations with the European Union on a number of areas, SPS in terms of the movement of food and live animals, defence and security, and also what they call the ETS, so the Emissions Trading Scheme. The EU in the last 10 days has had its negotiating mandate approved by the European Parliament. So we're expecting in the coming months ahead that the UK and the EU will open its conversations, will begin with that emissions trading conversation, and that CBAM and the alignment of CBAM or the recognition of either side CBAM will form part of that conversation. So in answer to Jim's question, I think there's an expectation that there will be some moves to align. Whether that's achievable through this negotiation or not remains to be seen. Both sides have their own interests in play, and we're screaming from the sidelines to say, well, just provide us with the clarity that we require. Is that your understanding about where ultimately we'll likely end up?
That's absolutely the case, Stephen. I think, in the summer, it was announced, at that big EU-UK summit that CBAM alignment was going to occur between the UK and the EU. But as you quite rightly point out, the devil's in the detail, and that detail had not been negotiated out yet. And that's why, in part, we have two different timelines and two different jurisdictional reporting requirements coming into effect in slightly different ways. I think if we zoom back slightly in practical terms for organizations, I think the broad principles largely apply here. In both scenarios, there's going to be a slight difference in perhaps what the tariff is based on those negotiations, particularly around what the free allocations are for companies and how those are phased out over what period of time. It'll be interesting to see how that alignment shakes out and where that clarity comes in from those negotiations. I think the hope was that would have come, or there would have been at least a postponement of the timelines until that had been sorted out, but that has not come pre-Christmas. So we haven't got that clarity that, quite rightly, you're shouting from the sidelines for, and everybody would really like to know. So I suppose the clarity is that stuff's all in conversation, but what's not in conversation is that there's going to be a CBAM, whether it's a UK CBAM or an EU CBAM, and that those CBAMs are going to work in order to try and level the playing field around those that are taking real steps in order to reduce the emissions associated with the production with high carbon intensive materials. And broadly speaking, those lists are the same, UK and EU on those materials. And the volumes are probably fairly similar in terms of that. There may be some quibble around that, but all of it's going to require you to understand your scope 1, your scope 2, and your scope 3 emissions and be on a clear trajectory to reducing that and doing so in such a way that you can really stand over and prove what you're saying you're doing on that. And the scope 1 and 2, that's where all that operational efficiency comes in, that transformation towards green energy. And on scope 3, the big category there, of course, in terms of all of this, is supply chain engagement. And whether that is your EU customer engaging you as a supplier, or whether you are engaging your supply chain for UK CBAM in 2027, both parties are needing to engage their suppliers and understand what their emissions data is. So as somebody that's kind of looking at how can you prepare your business effectively to be on the right side of all of this, it's understand your carbon footprint, be confident in what it is, be auditable around all of that, have those conversations with your customers, have those conversations with your suppliers, make sure that you are able to provide that data easily and that you're doing your best to be reducing the emissions on both sides of that question in an auditable way. If you do that, you're ready really to be able to generate competitive advantage against those that have not done that. As CBAM starts to come into effect and people start to have that leveling of that playing field on, who's reducing emissions and who's not, whether that is in this country or in China or in India or in other places. And of course, we all know as well, the strides that are being taken in terms of renewable energy production in those countries as well. So I think it's going to be an interesting thing to see how the tariffs shake out over the longer term. But even if the tariff difference is not massive, if you can provide actual data, that's the big difference between estimated and actual. That in itself is a big reduction opportunity in terms of the tariff cost. So I think that's your critical advantage at this stage, is get to a position of actual data. Initially for your EU customers, that's your scope 1 and 2, but as I say, for UK CBAM, that's going to be your supply chain data, and getting to a position of actual data understanding on that over this next, kind of 6 to 12 months.
And it's likely that the EU data requirement will be pretty similar to the UK's by the time both of those things come around. So you might as well just do it now, once and done.
Yeah.
This rises and falls, the risk increases or dissipates depending on the quality of the data. How easy is it to get that data? How should businesses go about starting that process?
I think, getting your data, your own scope 1 and 2 emissions, that's pretty easy, to be honest, because it's all stuff that you've got to hand. There's no business owner out there that I've ever come across that doesn't have access to their energy bill or know what they pay, at least to some degree on that, or, there's nobody that doesn't understand, these are the machines that I use and these are my operations and so on. It's really just getting a handle on that and bringing that into, and this is where I suppose there are greater or lesser levels of maturity in businesses. It's around the sophistication of your reporting on that. How automated are you on that? How, are you doing it retrospectively? Are you looking back on data and just reporting on what went, or are you in an active managing position? And I think that's the critical thing. If you have done something retrospective, you're kind of at the mercy of where you're at. Um, and you can report something, and it may be on a spreadsheet and therefore not really auditable. If you are a little further on along your maturity with that, you will be, already working with a platform to be able to bring that into an auditable position. And you'll be able to, integrate a lot of smart manufacturing processes in order to get to grips on the day-to-day consumption that you have and able to really optimize that moving forwards. And you're probably working with, some brokerage in order to ensure you're on the best tariff as you go along and that it's green. If you've done all those things, you've got all that data, that's your scope 1 and 2. That's pretty standard fare. The challenge is scope 3 and your supply chain data. And the more complex your supply chain, that's where time can come in. And verifying that data, how are they presenting it to you? Do they have evidence? Do they not have evidence on that kind of thing? Are they engaging with your request for it? Are they not? How big are they? How material are they to your day-to-day business and business as usual? If you lost that supplier, is that going to put your lights out? All of those sorts of considerations start to come into play when you think about supply chain. So really building your sense of resilience within your supply chain by having those conversations and, performing a high level, cost-based analysis of your carbon footprint, which gets you to an estimated position. That can be quite quick. Again, that's something we do for clients day and daily to get them to a point of understanding, well, listen, where is the bulk of our emissions within our supply chain? Who are the critical people we should be engaging with? We don't need to engage with absolutely everybody necessarily at this stage, but who are the critical ones? And then really having those conversations. Again, that can be facilitated and that can be simpler in terms of, providing portals for people to share data, having a third party verifying that, or supplying them with the tools to be able to measure their carbon footprint and coaching them through it. There's all sorts of different ways you can do it. I think it depends on how many requests also are going into that supplier for that data, whether they've taken that action or whether they haven't. So obviously, the more people ask, the more people take action and get ready for that. So, and
achieving.
I can't kind of go, it takes exactly this long, Stephen, because it is, how long is a piece of string slightly? Everybody's supply chain is a little bit different, and therein lies the complexity.
But the argument that you've been offering us today, which is a very good one, by the way, is that with that effort, you basically, as a minimum, have cut in half the exposure in terms of the potential tariff. So without that auditable data, I think in your slides you talked about steel as an example that potentially is 180 euros per ton times 50 tons as a minimum. It could be hundreds and hundreds of tons for many manufacturers, for instance. And to drop that to 80 or 90 euros per ton, you start to see the pound notes or the euro notes significantly changing as a result of making that particular effort to ensure that you have that auditable data from that supply chain side of stuff. I think that's the main argument here.
That's it. There's a financial incentive to do it, Stephen. That is the bottom line with it, literally. If you can get to that position of having an auditable data chain from your supply chain, you are in a position to generate cost savings in terms of tariffs. And, it is possible to get, you may be small, you may not have those departments in-house to do that, but you don't need them. There are organizations like ourselves that are there to help you do that and can get that done for you at a fraction of the cost that the tariff fee will be ultimately for you across the years. So I think the business case is clear with all of that. The question really is, willingness and whether whether you're feeling inertia on it and you kind of want to feel the sting of the tariff first and then do something about it, or whether you want to be kind of ahead of the pack on it and generate competitive advantage from it. So, and that's the commercial question for every business out there, is do you want to get on the front foot with it, or do you want to see what comes and then respond? The
And
challenge
even
is, 6 months to a year maybe to get on top of it. By which case your competitor who has done something on it is by far ahead of you.
and I think that's so at £80 a ton or €80 a ton as a take the minimum entry at 50 tons. I mean that's €4,000 of a price addition that you're going to have to apply to your customer uh, as a minimum gap between you and your potential competitor who's already got going on this stuff. So I mean it soon adds up, and you begin to see the risk of losing that competitive advantage or that relationship that you have with your customer already. We've a question in the chat here which says, as a midpoint supplier between the mill and the manufacturer in steel, what information should we be prioritizing for the customer base in the Republic of Ireland in the early stages of EU CBAM? And what can we do to ensure we're providing them with the correct information prior to having our mill supplier reporting in full for the UK CBAM timeline?
Good question. Okay, so the important thing here is you want to move to actual emissions data for your scope 1 and 2. So you want to be in a position to provide scope 1 and 2 data to an auditable level at pace, at will, to those EU customers. If you can do that, then you're ready. And have those conversations, maybe just test it with them as well. I think a useful thing to do is to have that conversation and say, listen, is there a template we can use with you for this that you're looking for? Have that conversation with that customer, and they're going to guide you to listen, provide it to us in this particular way. And let's check that. Yep, that's exactly how we want it. Or they're going to say, actually, we want it a little bit differently. We want it like this. So if you're not in a position and have not already had those conversations, definitely have those conversations in the next week so that you have a couple of weeks before Christmas to try and do something about that, to pull that forwards. And if you need some support with that, by all means, reach out to us and we'll see what we can do to help you in that scenario.
Good stuff. You talked there about energy costs, and you mentioned about energy bill volatility as a big financial pressure on a business, never mind anything else. How can manufacturers get more control over those energy costs while also getting ready for this emissions reporting?
I think first of all, and that's why I've got this on the screen here, is it starts with looking at your energy bill. It starts in doing a deep dive into that and starting to think about, what tariff are you on? Can we get you onto a better tariff? Do you have, climate change levy within your bill? Is that something that we can help you with in terms of getting you some relief on that? Are you on a green energy tariff? And can we get you onto that? Because again, that's going to provide evidence and data trail that you can provide in terms of CBAM moving forwards as well. Can we have a look at what you're paying in terms of your energy bill in out of office hours use or things like that? Having a look at the data specifically within your bill is really going to give an indication of whether there are optimization opportunities. And that's what this health check really is about, is understanding first and foremost, very quickly, is there an opportunity for cost saving either on your tariff, switch to green energy and an optimization? At that point, if that comes out and it says, yes, there is, then the deeper dive starts to take place and really understanding, well, what are those opportunities and why are those anomalies that have been identified there? Going out to market with that and looking at brokering something that's more competitive for you. And then also moving from an kind of estimated position on where the optimization opportunities are to actually going and having a look. And I think that can be done manually, but the better way really is to move towards sub-meter level meters that can give you that dashboard of what's looking at on a half hourly basis. And I think once you get to that, for most people, and those, we hear a lot, people have installed those and they have those dashboards, but the dashboard is giving them data, it's not giving them insight. So I think moving towards a position of here's what all that data means and here's what you should do about it is also a really important shift towards understanding what you can do about it. If you're in a management meeting, you don't want to look at kilowatt hour data and you want to know, did somebody look at the kilowatt hour data and what should we do? What should we do to reduce it? What are those things that we should do to reduce it? Are there free, low, no cost options for us around that? Or are there some investment, things that we need to consider? If so, what's the payback terms on those? And if so, where, do we self-fund that? Is there funding available for that? Are there grants available for that? Can we move to, do we get a loan? Is it a low interest loan because we can provide carbon emissions data associated with all of this? Can somebody help create that conversation? That's really where that starts to come into frame around managing those operational emissions and those energy emissions. And I think getting some support on that to get it right, is going to pay for itself in spades. Like we literally saved a company 270 grand last week on just that. Having a look at the energy bill, doing a deeper dive assessment, looking at, brokering a better deal for them, and then looking at, okay, well, here's, a small investment to look at sub-metering to move things forward, giving you insights on that energy bill, what you can do. Here's your roadmap. This is how management works within an organization.
I probably time for just two more questions if we're okay. I'll finish with a what next type question, but there's a question in the chat there from David. Earlier in the presentation, you mentioned process level emissions as one of our four main areas of reporting. Will CBAM reporting require the documenting of carbon emissions not directly accounted for in the product, i.e. carbon emissions from tools used across multiple products or processes? So if someone's using a tool to actually help with the construction or the manufacture of a particular product, are we likely to end up at that level of reporting requirement that you need the emissions data for the factory somewhere in the world that made that hammer or those screwdrivers or whatever the case may be?
Yeah, so this is where, if you have some products that are in scope and some products that are not in scope, and equipment is used on multiple things, and that's where some complexity starts to come in. But that's where moving to a position of live data is going to really help you with that moving forwards. And that is going to be a source of reporting requirement moving forwards. It is that, process level emissions and verifiable data on process level emissions. I think at this stage, the important thing is to know here is the tonnage of material that's been processed, and here is the energy that's been consumed in order to create the tonnage that there is on that, and that can be done through some calculations, and that can be verified. So there are, in short, yes, we're going to need to move to process level emissions reporting, but that doesn't need to be overly complex to begin with. And overly challenging to begin with in order to get you at a position of being able to have some advantage on it. I think, medium term, longer term, the automation of that, that flow of information, that data is going to be critical to generating further advantage.
And a final question just from ourselves, and people are welcome to send us questions, and we'll send them through to Ben after the event as well, so you can be reassured that we'll get you the answers if something pops into your mind having consumed the webinar today. At the core of all of this is having good reporting, plain and simple, getting started on it and having something particularly that's auditable, so you can get those significant tariff discounts, or your customer in Ireland can get those significant tariff discounts if you're requested information, if they request information from you. So to kind of set that system or that process up, what kind of costs are we talking about to set up that system for proper emissions measurement and reporting? How long would it take to get something up that's sufficiently robust enough to be auditable? And you already mentioned that potential in terms of energy savings, but is there quick wins here in terms of people can kind of do the balance sheet on this one and go, well, I'm having to spend that over here, but actually in return, that's what's coming back?
Yeah, so it's going to be probably, if you're just doing scope 1 and 2, you can probably look at somewhere around 3 to 5K, depending on the size and complexity of your organization. And if you want to start looking at process level emissions and you want to bring in some smart metering associated with all of that, then that's going to be another calculation that comes into all of that, and that can multiply out, depending on how many smart meters there happen to be. But again, per smart meter, you're probably in the sort of 2K sort of range, to kind of move things through at the sub level. Then I think if you want to start looking at supply chain engagement, you're starting to think about probably somewhere in the 5K to get going with all of that as well. Auditable, and starting to be able to outsource some of the work on engagement of that supply chain. But that can also depends on the size of the supply chain, and and how many are being engaged and all of that. So it really depends. So I think, to get you moving, you can do things in around the kind of 3 to 5K range. But, depending on complexity and how much detail and how much equipment you want to involve in things, you could be looking at kind of 20K plus, depending on how things are within your organization. So I know that's kind of a broad range there, but it really does depend on a kind of case by case basis and what you've done thus far and all of that as well.
Yeah, and there's the residual benefits then as well of potentially, well, as you said, we saved the customer last week £270,000 on their energy bill. So there's
Right.
other things to be measured alongside here. I know that if you've not already done so, they pick up the phone, give Ben a call, or whoever you're using for this reporting. Equally, if you're an Invest NI client company, they have support there that may support the likes of Ben and his colleagues coming and doing this work with you, or they can help with the work that they're doing themselves. The key message here is doing nothing is not going to be an option here, regardless of being exempt from the direct reporting requirements for EU CBAM. The UK is going to have its own by in the next kind of 13 months. So people need to do something in order to avoid those tariff elements. And in the meantime, pick up the benefits of not just decarbonisation, but also the cost savings involved with that. Ben, thanks so much. This is a really confusing area for us all. I think you've brought real clarity there, which is certainly from my perspective, my little brain has certainly helped me significantly, and I appreciate that alone. If people have very direct questions, they can just contact you with the details that are on the screen. But I'll leave you just for the final word, just about what people should be doing now and how they should be getting going.
If you've not done anything right now, scan the QR code, get in touch, get your energy bills sorted out. That's going to give you some data and get you a bit of a plan on what to do next. If you've already done that, I think the next thing really, and you've done your scope 1 and 2, supply chain's the big thing. Have a conversation about supply chain. You've got 12, 13 months to get that sorted out, and it's going to take the guts of that to really do that in a way that you're going to be able to generate some savings come January 2027. So I'd say that, those are the things to do. Sort your energy out first and foremost. Make sure you can report on scope 1 and 2 for January. Have those conversations with your customers on that. And then, over this next 12 months, really look at how you tie down operational efficiencies, how you engage supply chain, how you make all that auditable and clear, and get yourself in a really strong position moving forwards. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks very much, Ben. Really appreciate your time. We will be sharing the recording and the slides after the event, but hopefully you found it as informative as I have done, and we'll catch you again at our next session. Thanks very much.
Thanks, everybody.